Recently, I found myself in Prague, and I had the opportunity to do something that has been on my bucket list for a very long time now: a metro challenge. A metro challenge is a popular concept among transit fans. It's perhaps most famous in London, but the concept also exists in my home city of Chicago. The challenge is to get to every station on the metro system. Now, the natural question that always follows is, what constitutes all of the metro stations? In the case of most metros, this is often somewhat subjective. Some cities like London have very established challenges and rules for what counts. Chicago is similar in this sense. Prague has a less established tradition of the challenge, so I set my own rules by a fairly common standard. That is, all of the heavy rail rapid transit lines. In other words, I needed to get to all the stations on the metro train system itself. I allowed myself to use the city's tram and bus networks to get around faster throughout the challenge, but the stations I counted were just the ones on the train. That is, each of the 3 train lines A, B, and C. In total, this comes to 58 stations. Now, Prague has a relatively small rail system compared to something like Chicago, or larger still, London or New York. This made it a relatively easy challenge for my first one, and it was also perfect for the amount of time that I had available to do it. Since many viewers may not be familiar, here's a quick overview of Prague's metro network. As I mentioned earlier, the system has 3 lines, labeled A, B, and C. Lines A and B form an X pattern across the city between Nemocnice Motol and Depo-Hoshkivac, and between Zlichin and Cherny Most, respectively. The appropriately named C line makes a C shape around the eastern half of the city, serving the area of Lesniane in the north and Haye in the south. I started out at Vyšehrad station along with a couple of family members who had come out to join me for the adventure. We made our way around the 3 different lines, eventually ending at Hlavní nádraží station, the mainline rail station for Prague, also in the downtown area. Before I go any further, I think it's important to note that the goal with metro challenges is often to reach all the stations within the fastest recorded time. This was not a major objective for me, as my primary goal was simply to get to all the stations in the first place, enjoy the process, and do so relatively efficiently. I looked up the record time for the event afterwards, and we had taken about an hour longer to do it. There were a few things I could definitely point to that made our run slow, but perhaps the biggest one was the fact that both our starting and ending points were in the downtown area. A faster way to do it definitely would have been to start or end at the end point of one of the lines to make the most efficient use of the time while the clock is running. I chose not to do this because at the end of the day, I was already downtown. The time to get to the end of a line would have been expended anyway, and having the shortest possible time wasn't really my goal. If you want to do this with the absolute fastest time possible, you probably won't want to exactly replicate my route. And so we set out, starting at Vyšehrad station. Prague Metro is somewhat unusual in being almost entirely underground, including nearly all of its terminal stations. Haje Station, where we first got off, was one of these typical underground terminals. It's just your standard underground station with an island platform and a turnback just beyond the station. Unlike many other rapid transit terminal stations, Prague's underground terminals are operated like any other station. Trains always arrive on the same platform for the direction they're going. Once passengers have alighted from the train, it leaves to go to the turnback track and then comes back into the station going the other way and on the other track, and then it's ready to pick up passengers headed back into the city. This is actually typically a more efficient way to run a rapid transit terminal, especially if one train is already on the turnback when the next train arrives. We saw the efficiency of this demonstrated as we had only just got off the train and began to walk up the platform when our next train arrived. At Muzeum Station, we took a moment to observe that the transfer process between lines is very straightforward and efficient, which is not something that every subway system can say. This train then took us along the less than half-a-mile stretch of revenue track on Prague's metro that is above ground and in the open air, and took us to Depot Hoškovac, the only conventional terminal station on the network. This station operates more like terminals on most other networks, with trains arriving on either platform, standing for several minutes, and then departing again from that same platform. It's also worth noting that the time we spent here waiting for the train to change ends, around 5 to 6 minutes, was the longest time we spent waiting for a train the entire day. From Nismose Moto, we boarded our first of 2 bus connections, this one on the number 180. As daylight faded, we found ourselves riding through some of the more far-flung neighborhoods of Prague, less often seen by the tourist eye. With this being about the halfway mark of the challenge, it was at this point that we checked on our timer and confirmed that we were, in fact, right on time, being just over an hour and a half in on our estimated just over 3 hours for the total challenge. It was also this time, however, that the first of two major mishaps occurred on the trip. Namely, in this case, my iPhone, which I'd been using to take videos, ran out of storage thanks to the fact that we had been traveling for several days and I'd been taking a lot more pictures and videos than normal. With lots of important footage on there and nowhere to offload to, I couldn't delete anything and I couldn't take any more videos. Thankfully, one of my brothers who was accompanying me on the challenge came to the rescue and lent me his camera to finish out the video. Now, he's a photographer and his camera is a more high-end Canon, and it's the kind that you really need to know how to use properly to get the best quality out of it. Now, I'm not a videographer, I'm just a guy who likes trains and happens to have a YouTube channel. So the shots in the rest of this video may look a little dark or just a little weird. Anyway, we got the new camera online just before the bus arrived at Zliчин, and then it was time to make the next transfer. Between Hloubětín and Černý Most on the B line is the other section of the metro to run above ground, but it does so in an enclosed glass tunnel, which gives it a really cool look. With that said, the stations here use side platforms, including the terminal at Černý Most, which made finding the platform to get on the train going back to the city just a little more complicated.
No, we're fine.
Once we did this was when the second of the two major mishaps occurred. This came from when I misread the map, knowing that the station we were supposed to get off was Hloubětín, which I mistakenly believed to be the first stop after the train left out of Černý Most. Not bothering to carefully check the station name, we got off at this first station, which was in fact Pražská Hrada. With this being another above-ground station, I could immediately tell that this did not match up with my knowledge of the station where we were supposed to get off and make the next bus transfer. This led to several slightly tense and very confused minutes of walking around dark and rainy alleyways and parking lots, attempting to find the right bus stop. Eventually, with a little bit of real-time intervention from Citymapper, we were able to get to the number 110 bus and get back on track. It wasn't until later in the evening, after we were done, that I eventually was able to discover my big mistake. Still, we are back on track now. and then it was back onto the C line where it all started.
Ukončete prosím výstup a nástup, dveře se zavírají. Příští stanice nádraží Holešovice, přestup na linky S a další vlakové spoje.
And there you have it. Prague Metro Challenge complete. As I said at the beginning of the video, 3 hours and 35 minutes is definitely not the record fastest time. But we did it, and we had a good time. The route we picked did also mean that there is a short stretch of the network between Hlavní nádraží and Muzeum stations that we did not cover, although we did reach our goal of making it to every station. We did come back to complete this little stretch of track later in the evening, however, so I can properly say that I have now ridden every single bit of the Prague Metro. And if that's not a fun fact, I don't know what is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.